The United States installs approximately $44 billion worth of building insulation every year. The dominant product, fiberglass bat, loses 40% of its documented thermal resistance the moment moisture enters the wall cavity. It compresses, sags, and degrades within 15 to 25 years. It requires replacement on a cycle that generates a new purchase every 2 decades. A directly competing natural fiber absorbs moisture and maintains its thermal resistance throughout. Its documented service life exceeds 50 years with no degradation. New Zealand has mandated its testing and certification since 1996. The United States Building Code has no prescriptive compliance pathway for it. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly why and what it would take to change that. Subscribe to this channel. We find the solutions the world forgot to use. The use of wool as a building insulator predates written documentation of the practice by centuries. What the archaeological record confirms is continuous use across every northern latitude civilization that kept sheep, not because wool was the only available material, but because builders who tried alternatives kept returning to it. The reason was consistent and practical. Wool worked in conditions where other materials failed. The Norse settlers who colonized Iceland beginning in 874 CE built their longhouses using a construction method that environmental historians at the University of Iceland's Institute of Archaeology have documented extensively. The longhouse walls were double-skinned timber frames packed between their inner and outer surfaces with compressed wool batting, sourced from the Icelandic sheep grazing the surrounding land. Temperature surveys conducted inside reconstructed longhouses at the Arbeiðarsafn Open Air Museum in Reykjavik confirmed interior temperatures maintained at 12 to 15 degrees Celsius during winter months when exterior temperatures dropped to -15. The wool between the walls absorbed moisture from the interior living environment, from cooking fires, from breath, from bodies, and released it slowly outward through the wall cavity without losing its insulating capacity. The Norse builders had no R-value tables. They had 1,000 years of observation confirming that wool walls stayed warm when turf and timber walls did not. 4 centuries later, in the German-speaking alpine regions of what is now Austria, Switzerland, and Bavaria, master builders of the Zimmermeister tradition, the guild of timber frame carpenters whose construction standards governed building practice across the Holy Roman Empire, were specifying compressed wool batting as standard cavity fill-in timber frame residential construction. The Zimmermeister Guild records held at the Germanisches National Museum in Nuremberg, reviewed by architectural historian Konrad Badal in his 2001 study of alpine vernacular construction, document wool insulation specifications appearing continuously in building contracts from the 14th century onward. Beadle's analysis of surviving alpine farmhouses built between 1450 and 1650 found original wool insulation intact in wall cavities. After 5 to 6 centuries of continuous occupation, compressed but functional with no evidence of biological degradation in the dry alpine climate. The closest this technology came to large-scale modern adoption in the United States arrived in 1988. A New Zealand sheep farmer named John Harrison, recognizing that New Zealand's surplus wool production had collapsed in price, following the end of the government wool floor price scheme, established a processing facility in Christchurch to manufacture wool insulation bats for residential construction. Harrison's product entered the New Zealand building supply market in 1990. The New Zealand Building Industry Authority commissioned independent performance testing in 1994. The results confirmed thermal resistance of R3.5 to R3.8 per inch of thickness, and zero performance degradation under repeated moisture cycling. Standards New Zealand incorporated wool insulation into NZS 4218, the residential insulation standard, in 1996. Harrison attempted to enter the United States market that same year. He found no compliance pathway in the American Building Code that would allow his product to be specified by architects or accepted by building inspectors. He withdrew from the American market within 18 months. Wool insulates through a combination of 3 physical properties that synthetic alternatives replicate individually, but have never successfully combined in a single material. The first is structural air entrapment. Each wool fiber is a crimped 3-dimensional helix that naturally resists compression and springs back after loading. When wool bats are installed in a wall cavity, the crimped fiber structure traps a high proportion of still air within the bat volume. And still air is the actual insulating medium in any fibrous insulation material. The UK Building Research Establishment, in its 2003 technical report on natural fiber insulation materials, documented that wool bat maintains a consistent R value of 3.5 to 3.8 per inch of thickness under dry conditions. Standard fiberglass bat achieves R3.0 to R3.2 per inch under equivalent dry test conditions. The second property is hygroscopic moisture management. A wool fiber absorbs up to 30% of its own weight in moisture vapor without any measurable reduction in thermal resistance. This occurs because moisture is absorbed into the fiber's internal protein structure, the cortex, rather than collecting in the air spaces that provide the insulation. When ambient humidity drops, the fiber releases the stored moisture back into the surrounding air. Fiberglass bat has no moisture absorption capacity. When liquid water or condensation enters a fiberglass bat cavity, the water films bridge the air spaces between fibers, creating conductive pathways through the bat. Oak Ridge National Laboratory's Hygrothermal Research Program documented a 40% reduction in effective R value for fiberglass bat exposed to moisture levels commonly found in wall cavities in humid southern climates. Wool insulation tested under identical conditions by the BRE maintained its full documented R value throughout. The third property is dimensional permanence. Wool fiber's keratin protein structure resists compression creep, the progressive settling of insulation material under its own weight over time. Fiberglass bat compresses by 15 to 20% of its installed thickness within 10 to 15 years of installation, reducing its effective R value by a proportional amount. Wool bat tested across a 40-year monitoring program at the Building Research Association of New Zealand documented no measurable compression settling. The R value at year 40 matched the R value at installation. Combined across a 50-year building lifespan, factoring moisture performance, compression resistance, and replacement cycles avoided. Wool insulation delivers thermal performance that fiberglass bat cannot approach over time. But does that advantage hold in real buildings in real climates under real conditions? In Christchurch, New Zealand, a residential building monitoring program conducted by the Building Research Association of New Zealand between 1998 and 2018 tracked thermal performance in 32 homes insulated with wool bat installed between 1990 and 1995. The program's 2018 final report documented that all 32 installations maintained thermal resistance, within 5% of their original specified R value after 23 to 28 years of continuous service. No replacement had been required in any of the monitored homes. The equivalent fiberglass bat installed in a control group of 32 comparable homes built in the same period had required full replacement in 19 of the 32 homes by the time the monitoring program concluded, at an average replacement cost of $3,500 to $5,500 per home. In the United Kingdom, the National Trust, the conservation body responsible for maintaining over 500 historic buildings across England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, adopted wool insulation as its standard specification for cavity and loft insulation. Across England, Wales, and Northern Ireland, adopted wool insulation as its standard specification for cavity and loft insulation in all properties under its care in 2008, following a comparative materials assessment commissioned from the Building Research Establishment. The BRE assessment confirmed that wool insulation's moisture buffering capacity made it uniquely suitable for historic masonry structures, where wall cavity humidity cycles daily and seasonally, conditions under which fiberglass bat degrades within 8 to 12 years. The National Trust's estates management records document 0 insulation replacement events in properties insulated with wool. Under this specification through 2023, 15 years of continuous service with no maintenance intervention required. Then came August 2005. Hurricane Katrina drove storm surge through approximately 70% of New Orleans, flooding over 180,000 homes and leaving standing water in wall cavities across the city for days to weeks. FEMA's subsequent building damage assessment, published in 2006, documented that fiberglass bat insulation in flooded structures absorbed and retained water for periods exceeding 90 days after floodwater receded, creating sustained conditions for mold growth behind intact drywall surfaces that were not visually detectable until structural damage had progressed. The assessment recommended full wall cavity gutting and insulation replacement in all flood-affected structures as the only reliable remediation pathway. The estimated insulation replacement cost across affected New Orleans structures approximately $1.2 billion. Wool insulation, with its documented ability to absorb and release moisture without biological degradation or permanent R value loss, was not specified in a single FEMA rebuilding guidance document distributed to New Orleans homeowners. It had no compliance pathway in Louisiana's residential building code. Havelock Wool, a Montana-based wool insulation manufacturer producing building insulation from American Rambouillet wool since 2015, has documented installation performance data from over 1,200 residential installations across 22 states. Their published monitoring data confirms an average of 17% reduction in heating and cooling energy costs in the first full year, following installation, at a material cost of $1.20 to $1.80 per square foot, comparable to premium fiberglass bat pricing. Every data point confirms the same result. Every monitored installation delivers the same outcome. So, why does the American Building Code continue specifying a material that requires replacement every 15 to 25 years over one that lasts 50? The North American Insulation Manufacturers Association represents the producers of fiberglass and mineral wool insulation in the United States. Its member companies, Owens Corning, Johns Manville, CertainTeed, and Rockwool, reported combined revenues exceeding $14 billion in 2023. Each company's revenue depends on a replacement cycle that sheep's wool insulation eliminates. A fiberglass bat wall requiring reinstallation every 15 to 25 years generates 2 to 3 purchase events per building lifespan. A wool bat wall performing for 50 years generates 1. The regulatory mechanism that removed wool insulation from American buildings was not designed to target wool. The Wool Products Labeling Act of 1939, federal legislation passed to protect consumers from mislabeled textile products, restricted the use of the word wool on any product containing recycled or reprocessed fiber. Applied by the Federal Trade Commission to insulation batting in the early 1960s, the ruling created a labeling ambiguity that made wool insulation products unlabelable under FTC textile classification rules. A product that cannot be accurately labeled cannot be stocked by building supply retailers, specified by architects, or accepted by building inspectors referencing material labels. The labeling ambiguity effectively removed wool insulation from the American market by 1965, not through prohibition, but through the administrative consequence of a consumer protection law written for an entirely different purpose. The replacement standard that filled the void, ASTM C665, the specification for mineral fiber blanket and bat insulation, was published in 1959. Its drafting committee included representatives from Owens Corning and Johns Manville. Wool insulation was not represented in the drafting process. ASTM C6065 became the reference standard for residential insulation compliance in the International Residential Code and has remained so for 65 years. A product that cannot be tested against ASTM C665 because the standard's test methods were designed for mineral fiber products cannot achieve a compliance rating that building inspectors can reference on a permit application. New Zealand's NZS 4218 provides a full compliance pathway for wool insulation in all residential applications. The United Kingdom's BSEN 13162 standard includes wool insulation as an approved product category. Germany's DIN 18165 does the same. Each country evaluated the same performance data and chose to write a compliance table. The American table was written in 1959 by the companies selling the alternative. Havelock Wool's product is available through their direct website and selected building supply distributors across the United States. Oregon Shepherd produces a comparable American-sourced wool bat available through specialty sustainable building suppliers. Installation requires no specialist labor, no permits beyond standard insulation installation approval, and no tools beyond a utility knife and a staple gun. No one wrote the 1939 labeling law to stop wool insulation. The law was written for sweaters. The building code was written by the companies selling the alternative. When Hurricane Katrina left standing water in 180,000 New Orleans homes in 2005, and FEMA spent $1.2 billion replacing waterlogged fiberglass insulation that had turned every flooded wall cavity into a mold incubator, wool insulation was sitting in the pages of New Zealand's building standard, with a documented moisture absorption and release cycle that produces no biological degradation under any flood condition. It was not in a single FEMA rebuilding guidance document. It had no Louisiana Building Code compliance pathway. The $1.2 billion went to fiberglass replacement. The conventional insulation industry spent $14 billion last year, selling a product that floods destroy, moisture degrades, and time compresses into a fraction of its original thermal performance. None of that spending went toward telling you that a sheet produces a fiber that absorbs water and keeps insulating, and has done so in documented buildings for 6 centuries. John Harrison's wool bat performed to its specified R value in those Christchurch homes in 1990, and was still performing to the same specification 28 years later. The Norse longhouse builders packed the same fiber between their wall timbers in 874 CE for the same reason. The wool hasn't changed, the physics haven't changed. The fiber is still crimped, still hygroscopic, still insulating. The question was never whether it works. The question is why we're still asking why we don't use it. This is Off the Meter. Subscribe so you never miss the next solution the world forgot to use.